real quick. Can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, then we can start. Let's go. Okay, so today we will talk about the rebirth of virtual entities, now known as virtual tables, how you can use the full capability CRUD operations on virtual entities now, and why they are now much more useful. Okay, let's start with a quick introduction. So, first of all, who am I? I'm a software developer based in Zagreb, Croatia. I'm Microsoft MVP. I'm working for a company called Span, and I'm 5 years now in the BizUp space, mostly focused on the C implementations and nowadays mostly on Power Apps. Okay, let's start with what are the virtual tables at a first point. So those are the entities, the tables that feel just like a normal table. You have a table in your system that will provide you with data. You can create, update, delete the data from it, and it just feels normal. But what are the differences between virtual and the normal tables? The main difference is that the data is outside Dataverse. You can have your data in some external database stored in Azure or on-premise somewhere. You can have your data exposed as a web service or whatever you want. The point is that your data is not stored in Dataverse, it's stored somewhere else. And the data from that external data source is fetched in real time. When you invoke the list in your model-driven app, for example, it will fetch the data in real time and you will get the latest data, the updated version every time you call the refresh from your external system. And how did everything start with virtual entities? Back in the days with version 9.0, the virtual entities are introduced. It's like 2 years now, and they were like 2 years without any major update. They were like forgotten feature. We had only read-only possibility for our virtual entities. So we have a static data that is read-only. We can just present it to the user, but we couldn't do anything else. We could just retrieve the data, view all the properties we need, but we couldn't manipulate with the data straight from our model-driven apps. Also, we needed GUID as identifier. That was a really pain because most of the systems don't use GUIDs as IDs. And in that case, we went some crazy transformations to achieve that, or maybe we didn't want to use virtual entities because we didn't have GUIDs and the connectors didn't support any kind of IDs that is not GUID. We had three out-of-the-box data providers. Three, it's like relative. It's almost only two because the Cosmos DB connector was uh, out of work for almost more than 2 years now. It was fixed, I don't know, like a month or so ago. And so we basically had two out of the box providers. And it was only pro dev tool because most of the time we went the route to create a custom providers for our data because other providers were not suitable in much cases. So the problem was the low code developers were not available to use those kind of features. And now, uh, 2 months ago, we had a reborn, like a phoenix. We Microsoft added a full CRUD support, so we basically now can do anything with data in our external systems. It's not read-only anymore, and we can expand the use case scenarios a lot. From now on, IDs can be anything. We don't need to have GUIDs anymore for the out-of-the-box providers but for custom ones, we still need to use GUIDs and do our transformations. And now we have 4 out-of-box connectors and now fully working Cosmos DB connector that is fixed and the new virtual connector. We are going towards that the virtual entities will become low-code friendly because the Microsoft is going the route that they will expand the family of connectors to the Power Automate connector. So basically, in future, we'll have most of the connectors we use in Power Automate straight in our virtual connectors in model-driven apps in Dataverse. So we can use anything we are using in Power Automate straightly in our Dataverse and model-driven apps. At the moment, only SQL is available, but more definitely to come. Okay, so which data providers do we have? So we have OData v4, a standard one when we are working with Dataverse because all the APIs are using OData v4 now. We have Cosmos DB, which is pretty limited to the use case when we are using that Cosmos DB. A custom one when developers go crazy with the imagination and creating awesome connectors that connect to various external sources. And the new one, the low code one, virtual connector that will, I think, be the future go-to connector. Let's go and dive more deeply in each of those. So OData v4, that was my definitely personal favorite from read-only era because you just need to create OData v4 endpoint, expose data through that endpoint, just map the external tables to your entities in Dataverse, and you're good to go. You can straight away use it with a easy configuration, and you will have your data read-only from that era, but now OData supports also CRUD. Um, and it's a really good start if you want to explore virtual entities because it's really, really easy to configure. Just try it with some random OData source that you can find on the web, and you're good to go. The biggest pain point in OData v4 is that it doesn't support authorization. You just need to have a basic uh, anonymous auth there. So basically, you don't have any kind of authorization on your web service to access their data. In the read-only era, it was okay because the data was read-only, but today it is a kind of big problem because you don't want to expose the full CRUD operation without any authorization. That that's really the biggest pain point of the OData v4, but I think that Microsoft will give us support for that authorization in near future. Okay, so that's all for OData. Let's go to Cosmos DB. Cosmos DB provider is in preview like forever. It is in preview for more than 2 years. It's pretty limited because it covers only Cosmos DB, and I think that Cosmos DB is not getting that much love in the world today. So you can create it only with Cosmos DB, and I would not prefer that data source because it was unstable for the first place. It was not working for 2 years. It is easy to configure it once you have the connection string to your Cosmos DB, but I'm not so sure that Microsoft will invest any time soon to this connector. I think that this Cosmos DB connector will be joining the virtual connectors family and will consume it from there. So I would definitely, at the moment, avoid the Cosmos DB connector if you don't need to use it. The third one is the newest addition to the family, virtual connector. That is a low-code approach to virtual entities. It has almost no configuration at all. You just need to have your SQL connections in your Dataverse that you maybe previously used in Power Automate, and you're good to go. It supports only SQL at the moment, but more connectors are to come for sure. It has a huge potentials because if you think about it, there are like 300 connectors in Power Automate. I think that this connector will definitely become the number one connector that we will use in our implementations in future because it will do everything for us. We just need to map which uh, entities do we want in our system, and when we check the settings, let's show this entity in our Dataverse, it will create the virtual entity for us. We don't need to configure anything. We just need to set the setting. I want to see that in my environment, and boom, it will just magically be created there, and you're good to go. You will consume your data straight away with almost no work to do. And as I said, I think that that will be number one option in no time when they release a few more uh, connectors to the virtual connector. Okay, and since this is a developer conference, I think the biggest impact for us is, of course, custom connector. As you can see on the right, it says, with great power comes great responsibility, which is totally true for this connector. And why is that so? Because it's a pro dev tool. We know how much developers can make things exciting and complex at the same time. Um, you're still starting from the totally blank canvas. Your connector doesn't support anything until you make the code for it. Maybe you are thinking, yeah, I just need to fill my collection and everything will be magically be there. But no, you need to take care of sorting, filtering, and stuff like that because it's not there for you in framework. You have just blank plugin, retrieve multiple, and you just need to start from there. Uh, I suggest that you go one step at a time with this type of connectors. Why is that so? Because it's hard to cover all the scenarios that your users will do with data. For example, if you will be using the virtual entities only in the subgrid, you don't need to cover all the other scenarios of filtering, for example, because the filtering part is pretty hard to make for all scenarios. Just go baby steps, cover the scenarios you need, and add the one the user is experiencing issues with in the future. You don't need to go big for the first time. You just cover the basic scenario that you need and you add the features on the go. And what do you need to implement there? So you need to implement 5 messages. So basically create, it's pretty simple one. You just need to create the record in external system, and the required parameter here is that you need to return ID, and that ID must be GUID. So maybe you can transform that GUID, or you can retrieve the original value of the GUID if you're using GUID in the external system, but the required output parameter is ID. Same goes with the update. You provide the ID and update that record in the external system. Delete is pretty simple. Just You just need to delete that record in the external system. Retrieve is also the basic one. You just provide an ID that you need to retrieve from external system and return as an output parameter that record. But the fun part is when you go to retrieve multiple action. Uh, that message is really hard to get it full capability because you need to cover a lot scenarios, and you could not even imagine how many features do you need to implement when dealing with retrieve multiple. Yeah, you basically need to return the collection of records, you should think, but yeah, before that, pre-processing, for example, a complex filtering done in the advanced find, and you need to create a query on your SQL, on your Cosmos DB, you name it, or on your web service where you can't do that complex filtering. Maybe you just need to fetch all the data, apply that filtering on the code level, and then return the filtered collection afterwards. That's a really hard thing to do, and I think that most people will spend a lot of time implementing retrieve multiple messages because it can get pretty messy with time when you think about new features that you need to implement. But there are some tools that can help you with the process of implementing that custom providers. And the first one is NuGet package crmsdk.data. I don't think that many people heard of that NuGet. Maybe when you're searching NuGet packages for Dataverse, maybe you seen that package, but you never like downloaded and explored what can you do with it. It's a helper code to simplify the development of the virtual providers. All the things you need are there, but the main part here is entity map factory that is used for mapping. So when you're defining your virtual entities, you define your external names, but we want to fetch that values directly in our code. So the entity map factory will help us to get that external values uh, of our actual Dataverse columns in code. And with that, you can then create queries around with that external names and query the external source with the right mappings directly configured in your solutions. As I said before, sorting, paging, filtering, it is not there and out of the box. You just need to implement every single feature for yourself. There is a great article on querying and that can help you to explore what can you expect when you create a custom provider. Let's jump real quick to my browser so I can show you. Sorry. Okay. Is article written by Mark Carrington, and he explains in detail how you can do retrieve multiple. But interesting part here, and which I really like, is this snippet here that has the steps that you need to cover before you release your custom provider. For example, check if you have criteria in query. So if you implemented the filtering, if you implemented the distinct queries, if you support linked entities, lock, if you support sorting, paging, query hints, subquery expressions, stop count, and you can then clear the issues one by one by clearing this template from exceptions. So when I clear the criteria, I just remove this exception, and I know I have my criteria, so filtering implemented for my connector. And it's really good source, and when you're starting with building connectors, copy this template and you're good to go. You will be covered in retrieve multiple, for example, in this case. Okay. As I said before, no GUID, no problem. Why is that so? Because you in almost 99% you are able to transform the primary key to GUID. For example, you have integer value for your ID on the external system. You just simply pad your integer value with some letters, for example, AAA to the GUID form, and you're good to go. You have your GUID, and you will know how to transform that GUID back and forth when you're dealing with your data. So in custom connectors, you need to use GUIDs, but you can almost always convert that GUID to some primary key to some kind of GUID and work with it. Okay, so what are the limitations? Those limitations were 2 years ago, but now we almost have the same list. So first two are now the past. We are not on read-only anymore. The GUIDs don't need to be unique ID for the out-of-the-box connector, but for the custom one, you need to cover that. So it's almost half-half. It's not a fully supported. So GUID is required in some scenarios, but in most scenarios, you don't need GUID as identifier. But security model, for example, comes with that all the entities, the virtual entities, are organization owned. So you don't have ability to filter that records based on owner or limit the use of that records by owner. You can set the role that has right, for example, to create or not to create virtual entities. You don't have the ownership middle tier of roles. Also, in that case, there is no field level security. You will always see everything. You can implement some kind of field level security inside your code when implementing retrieve and retrieve multiple, but it's not that convenient. You can't make the virtual entities as activity entities, so no showing them in timeline, for example. Roll-up and calculated fields are not supported in virtual entities, and there is no log file. Anything you do with your records, you can make the auditing in the external system, but not in the Dataverse as you are used to with any other entities. So there are limitations, but I think we are getting there. Maybe we'll get a better security model, for example, in near future, because as I see, Microsoft is now investing a lot of time in virtual entities, especially in virtual connector space. So maybe we'll see some of them crossed too in near future. But with the CRUD support, I think the main limitation that we had is removed, and I was so happy when I saw that the CRUD support is finally available for us with virtual entities. Okay, and I think that now we are ready for the demo part. So we'll now see how the virtual entities are working in the real life scenario. Okay, first of all, let's see, I will do a demo on SQL Server. So I created one database on the Azure, and I will try to show that data from the Azure tables, so the SQL tables, in our Dataverse. I will run these two queries just to make sure that everything's working. Okay, so I have like a little bit more than 1K records in my table, and it contains from the first name, last name, and one ID. As you can see, I have a lot of random names in my table. And what I want to do virtual entity that will just show those records inside the Dataverse, and we'll see it from our model-driven app. Uh, I will do that by calling the custom connector because we're developers. We want to see code and how it's done in the code. And so let's start. First of all, when we created our table in Azure, we need to create the plugins for our code before we are registering the virtual entity. So I created a simple plugins solution, and I have implemented create plugin, delete plugin, retrieve multiple, retrieve plugin, and update plugin, all prefixed, okay, with iPlugin interface. And after that, I need to build this. We'll deep dive in code at the end. I build this solution, and the next step is we need to register the DLL like we are registering the DLLs for our plugins normally via plugin registration tool. But this time we need to use the core plugin registration tool, not the one that is coming with XRM Toolbox. It is not supporting virtual entities at the moment, but I think we'll have that soon because I'm working on the project that is adding the feature to the XRM Toolbox version. And until then, we need to use the core one from Microsoft. If you didn't use the plugin registration tool outside of the XRM Toolbox, go to cds.tools, and from there you can download the plugin registration tools and all the SDK tools with a just simple click, that exposing the PowerShell scripts that will just download all the NuGet packages for us and extract it to one folder and then zip it back and download it as zip, and then you will have all the tools you need for that. Okay, click on get the SDK tools, and then download SDK zip file. When you download this zip file, you will get something like sdk.zip, and when you unzip it, you will get all the tools you need. There is a plugin registration folder. Open that folder and spin up plugin registration exe. When you open this one, the plugin registration will pop up. You will just need to create a new connection, connect to your environment, and you're good to go. After that, we want to register our assembly. If we scroll up there, I already registered my assembly. As you can see, as when I expand it, I have all my plugins there. You just go register new assembly and upload the assembly from your project, just like you're doing with all the plugins that you're uploading to the environment. After that, you should click register new data provider. When you click register new data provider, the first thing that you need to do is create new data source. Create new data source. You just give it some random name, plural name, select the solution that will be that data source will be added to, and it will generate name for you. After that, you can start playing with all the other properties here. I will just open my existing data provider here that I created for the purpose of this demo. So I named it CRUD data provider, add it to my solution, map it to my data source, and in assembly, I selected my assembly that I previously uploaded to the environment. And when when I select this assembly, I need to select the plugins for the various messages that are shown below. So retrieve, multiple, create, update, and delete. You just pick your plugin straight from the drop downs and click update. After that, it will take some time, but when it finishes, you will have all you need inside your solution on your Dataverse environment. Let's go to the Dataverse environment. Okay, it is the solution. And after that, you will have the data provider and the data source here. And after that, you know that you can actually create the virtual entity. But first, you need to create a data source instance from the administration area in Dataverse. So you go to the settings area, administration, and after that, virtual entity data sources. Click there and click new. Uh, I created a CRUD data provider in my plugin registration tool. And from there, I just need to pick it up and click OK. But I've created one before here. And let's see how it looks like. So I have a name and some additional parameters. That additional parameters are not uh, available straight out of the box, but you need to create them. So you go to your data source and add fields and add that fields to the form. So I created a connection string parameter that will be dynamically fetched every time I'm in my code, so I don't need to hard code the values every time I need to use my connection to the Azure SQL database. Okay, just simply add that to the form, and after that you will have the connection string here. So I've copy pasted the connection string for my SQL, and after that I'm ready to create my virtual entity. Okay, let's go to the entities, and I created an entity called human. Okay, when we open that entity, first thing we need to do is check the virtual entity checkbox here. After we selected that virtual entity checkbox, those two fields will pop up. I need to select my data source. That's the data source that we created in an administration area. We just select the data source, the CRUD data source that I created there, and we are done with that part. The next thing we need to do is create our display name, plural name, that are the names displayed in the Dataverse. But the important thing here is external name. So this external name in custom connection and the collection name is not that important. We just need one. For example, you can have the same values in both fields here, but this one will define which table in SQL do we need to search when we want to retrieve our data. So if we check MySQL, we see that my table is called person here. So we input external name person here, and now we need to add some fields. We need to create first name and last name field that will hold the data for us. I reused the original name field to set it to first name. So open the name field and set the external name to the name of the column in your database. So we're using first name here. If we look to the database, it's first name here. Same goes with the last name. I created a single line of text for last name here and set the external name to last name. With that being said, we are good to go. We just save, publish, and if everything is working, we should see the data coming from the SQL table directly in our Dataverse. Let's go to model-driven app that I created before, and I exposed in sitemap that human entity I created, and as you can see, I have all the data coming from the Azure SQL database here. You can see there are more than 1K records. I can go through pages. Uh, it is using some caching on the SQL side, so maybe first request will take some time, but other requests should come pretty quick. And you can just go through pages, you can sort the records and stuff like that. And it looks easy, but it's not that easy when we dive into the code. Let's go into the code and see how it's done. Okay, so first I will go with the simple messages that are implemented. So first, the create plugin. It's a pretty basic one, just the plugin code that you are used to. You are reading the target input parameter. You are creating a new GUID. You are calling now the connection. In this one, I didn't want to use the value from the server because I was lazy, but you can get a value from the server that I will show you afterwards. But basically, you're getting the connection to your SQL database. You're um, parsing the data, inputting the data from your entity. So you're reading the entity and passing that to the SQL query. You're executing the query. At the end, you just need to retrieve the GUI that you previously created here. So it's a pretty basic one. You're just executing the insert command directly on the SQL server, and it's basically it. The delete plugin is, I think, the easiest one because you just need to read the ID, just pass that ID to the SQL query and execute that query, and you really don't need to do anything more than that. You're good to go. With update plugin, almost everything as create, but you are updating the values, you're not creating them. So you are using the update command here. You are just checking if the parameters are contained in entity. So if the user inputted that parameters to the form or not. If yes, then add it to the SQL query. If not, just skip them. And after that, execute the query and your records are updated. In the retrieve plugin, it's almost the same as update, I believe. You just get the IDs, you just select the columns that you want to fetch directly from your SQL table, and you are just creating an entity object, filling the values with the values coming from the SQL table, and you are passing that entity object as a business entity parameter, business entity output parameter at the end, and it will just show the data in your model-driven app. As you can see, those actions are pretty simple ones. And if we try, for example, I don't know, let's go to the first, open that Carita. Let's say I want to update it to 2, save, save and close, and it's updated here. If we check that in our database, first name, Carita 2 is here. Okay, so it's updated in our SQL. So everything is working directly from our model-driven app. But the hardest part here is to implement the message that will retrieve the data here. For example, I didn't implement search criteria, so I can't do any type of filtering. So I want to search that Carita, so car, it, it, it will not just compute, and you will get an error because I didn't implement that stuff. But and everything else like paging, sorting is just working. Distinct queries, everything is working. And why is that so? Because we have the retrieve multiple plugin. If we look at the retrieve multiple, we can see that there is quite much code there. And that's why, because we need to implement all the features that we want to use straight in our code. So let's go through them. First of all, we need to get the query that is passed to our plugin. So when we are doing fetches, we'll get a fetch query In this parameter, converted to query expression, where we can easily manipulate the data in our C# code. We are getting the entity name, we're getting the metadata that we'll use afterwards. And as you can see, there is entity map factory dot create. That's the function coming from the sdk.data NuGet package. Okay, let's go to manage NuGet packages, and as you can see, I installed the Microsoft CRM SDK.data here. So that's why I can use this entity map factory .create method. We are just passing the metadata, and in this mapper, we got everything we need. So now we want to dynamically create our queries based on the data that is coming from fetch XML, for example. We want to convert the logical names that we have in Dataverse to the external names of our SQL table. And how do we do that? We get the column set columns from our query, and then we convert those column names to the external names by calling the mapper object here, map attribute name external, and passing that logical name, and it will fetch the external name for every single column that is called in fetch for us and create a list of that. Afterwards, we can check if the fetch XML is called with a distinct query or not. If it's using the distinct keyword, we'll add that distinct keyword also to our query. But maybe our endpoints or web services don't support that distinct. So maybe we need to fetch all data and then do the distinct in LinkQ or some other method. But since we are using the SQL now, we can just add a distinct to our command in SQL, and we are good to go. We are just joining that external names from the list here and creating the string for it. And we are starting to construct the SQL query from there. So we are adding the distinct keyword, all the fields that we need that came from the query, and we want to fetch it from which table? That's the one that I talked earlier. So we are getting the metadata for our entity here, and we are choosing the external name here. You have everything else here too, external name collection, but as I said, you can add anything there because you're the master of your plan, and you basically select the one that has the right value for your SQL table query. So the recommendation is to keep those two the same, but if they're not the same, you want to have separate ones. I don't know, maybe you're calling the web service that has single name and plural name. You can go for the different values here, but I use the external name as the single point of truth here. So I'm inputting external name, which basically converts to my person table. If you have external data in your data source, you need to add those few lines that are basically fetching the data source entity that contains everything that you configured in your process of creating the virtual entity. And in my case, I have stored the connection string, as I showed you before, in my data source, and I'm fetching that connection string like you're used to from the entity. And data source is just a simple entity. So key value pairs converted to string, and now I have my connection string in runtime. That's really great. As I said, sorting is not implemented by default, so I need to parse the query and see if the orders is empty or not. If it's not empty, then we know that we have some kind of sorting in our query. So we are fetching the external name for the sort attribute and adding that to order by part of our SQL query, and based on the order type, if it's ascending or descending, we just input the right keywords for the SQL syntax here. We're creating the entity collection object, which is the object that will contain all the information of our data. The main part here is the entities that we want to retrieve from our query. So now I'm executing the connection. I'm executing the command I constructed up there. And when I get the results, I create entity object for every single result that came back from the SQL and add it to one list. I didn't want to implement paging up there. I know there are SQL commands that can help me with paging. If you're using SQL Server, I think 2012 or up. But let's say I'm fetching all the records, like I have, for example, web service that will just retrieve all the records for me. I'm reading the query once again, and I'm getting page number. So basically, which page do I want to load and that I want to um, send as my output. And I dynamically uh, read the page info about count, how many records per page do I want to show. There is an interesting flag here that shows us if there are more records in our data set. When you see the navigation down there, when I go to the last page, the right arrow, so if I go to page number 5, the right arrow will be disabled. So basically that flag will show us if we will have the arrows disabled or not. So if the has more records is true and set to the entity collection, it will have arrow enabled. But in other case, that arrow will be disabled. So just an UX perspective. So the total count, so you can get a count down there in your model-driven app, how many records are there in the data set. Uh, and when you implement the paging that way, you just need to add few link queue statements here. So skip page number -1 times records per page and take how many records, the records I want to show per page. Make that a list and define some values in our entity collection. The important part here is entity name. If you don't send the entity name parameter, you'll get an error. And I think that people are struggling here because the virtual entities are not showing in the UCI if you don't set this parameter here. As I said, more records, just true, false, and add the entities from your list here and do the total record count. And when we have everything done here, we just need to pass that entity collection to the output parameter as a business entity collection. And after that, we'll get our output collections straight in our Dataverse. And that's why we see everything here. So if I sort it, you can see that sorting is working. We have paging. I can show you distinct, but we implemented distinct also in plugin. But the main part that you need to focus here is filtering, and it is quite complex. For the SQL, there is a great tool created by Mark Carrington again, that is SQL to CDS, that basically converts fetch XML to SQL query. And if you use that core engine created by Mark, you can easily convert fetch XMLs to SQL queries. But I didn't use it here because it's huge and It's not the purpose of this demo, but you can use it for sure. Okay, now when we saw what we have in demo, let's go to the last slide. So wrap it up with final thoughts. As I said before, OData was my favorite one, but if you don't if you don't need authorization part, if you are using only read-only entities, you can go data route, but any other thing, if you need to protect your data, and you should go to custom logic or wait for the virtual connector. Cosmos DB is, as I said before, in preview forever, and just try to avoid this one for now. You will get a new connector, I think, pretty soon, and it's just basically bad, so don't use it. On the other hand, if you have a complex logic, if you want to implement some kind of custom role management inside your plugin, go custom route. If you go complex logic, by, I don't know, fetching the data, go the custom route. But at the end, virtual connectors are future. This one that I showed in demo can be easily, really easily been created in the virtual connector because it's supporting SQL data, but I wanted to show you how to create a custom connector, and it will probably be the go-to option in future. For now, I think I would choose SQL. I will not go for a SQL custom connector. I would definitely use virtual connector in SQL. It's still in preview, but as I tried it, it's working pretty good with not a complex scenario, but middle tier scenario. I tried it and it's working just fine. And I think we are at the end of the presentation. Thank you everyone for listening, for tuning in. If you want to contact me, you can contact me on LinkedIn. You can contact me on my blog shown below, or I think the best way to interact with me is via Twitter. So handle Dynamics Ninja. If you have any questions, send me a direct message or just tweet something and tag me and I will try to help you. And thanks everyone, thanks sponsors for this bootcamp happening. There is a pretty neat promo code if you want to get it on the packed assortment. And yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and I hope there are some questions in chat. We can start Q&A now.
Thank you for the session, Ivan. There's a bunch of questions, and there's also a lot of interaction happening over here on the chat related to the virtual tables entities. And one of the questions is like, can we use a virtual entity to show data from multiple Dataverse environments?
Of course, you just need to create a custom connector, or yeah, your custom connector, because you can't go authorization part with OData. But
Okay.
basically, when we have OData, we will be able to connect to the other environments pretty easily because we'll go OData source, okay, OAuth to authorization, and we are good to go. But today we need to create a custom provider that will connect to other Dataverse environment and show the data for us.
Okay, cool. And can we get data from a virtual entity into Power BI?
I didn't try that, but I'm pretty sure you can, because Power BI is basically spinning retrieve multiples in the background. So I think it's possible.
Okay,
I
okay.
didn't
And
try it myself, but I think it's possible.
yeah, it would be a good assignment as well to just check that out. Also, there's another question that says, can we specify security role and permissions on these virtual tables?
Yeah, but we are limited to organization level. So basically, we can select if the role can create or not some entity, not by ownership. So we have only two values there. You can or you can't.
Okay, okay, cool. Okay, and moving on further. Could you just possibly point out a couple of use cases where we could use virtual entities, just one or two, so that we actually get an idea of that?
So the main scenario where I used virtual entities before is in, for example, marketing scenarios, where I had like that was also pre-marketing era. So when we didn't have marketing, we were using some other tools, and we have like interactions from users with our emails, email opened, email clicked, link open, link clicked, and stuff like that. And those interactions were like crazy in storage. We had additional storage for that kind of data. We didn't want to store that in the CDS instances. For example, you have 50 million interactions for users in your CRM system, and you want to show it on the contact form,
Mhm.
but only the subset for that contact. And we created, for example, Azure storage, so Azure tables. In that case, connected that with a custom connector, and we are showing that data directly on fly when the user is opening the form. The relevant data for that contact is shown directly on the form, and it's fetching the data from the Azure storage, for example.
Okay, okay, sounds good. And so by going by that, is it possible to use a virtual table for displaying SAP data in portals, in Power Apps portals, or on a model-driven app as well?
Yeah, sure. You can use virtual entities on the portal the same way you do the normal entities. You just create a view, add it to portal, and it will spin up the retrieve multiple query in the background, and it will show the data on the portal for you.
From SAP as well. I mean, will be connecting to that.
If we are creating a custom connector to the SAP, of course, then we can show the SAP data. Any other questions? Are you in mute? Because it's quiet there. Are you time out maybe?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I see one question here, so I will answer that one. Just cherry picking something from chat. Does the virtual connector support on-prem SQL DB via gateway? I didn't try it, but if you set it up in your connection that way, I think that it should work because you just need to provide a connection string for it, and you just select it from the list in the settings for the virtual connectors in your model-driven app. The next one is, can I create a relationship of virtual entities with out-of-the-box entity like contact and account? Of course, you can add relationship both ways. So lookup on contact, or you can create a lookup on the virtual entity on the contact record. So it's working both ways. You can even go many-to-many relationships too. Is this one to mapping, or we can map multiple tables from destination to one table in virtual entity? With out of the box, you can't map multiple tables. You can map one by one, but if you're creating a custom connector, you can easily query multiple tables, join that data to the single one, and expose it as the single virtual entity in your model-driven app. Okay. I don't see any more, and the time is up. So thank you once again, and I hope you're having a great conference today and you're learning new stuff. And I hope we are ready for our next presenter.
Thank you very much, Ivan. I think there's some problem with Yash, so I am gonna take over for now. So
Okay.
thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. It was a nice presentation looking at virtual tables and everything else. So I joined.
Thanks for having
I
me.
didn't. Yeah, I didn't join from the beginning. I just joined like half an hour back. But whatever I saw, it was really great to see. So thank you, Ivan.
Thank you. Yeah, we will have more on virtual entities, maybe on virtual connectors later on. I saw that
Yeah.
there's one more session.
Yep. Okay. Well, time for our next presenter, and the next presentation is on extending common data service using Azure Function from Alan De Castro. Alan, whenever you're ready, there you go. We can see you.
Yep. Hello, everyone. So give me 1 second. I will try to share my screen. Not this one, definitely. So, well, I think it's okay now.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. So you can start the recording if you want.
Yep. Hold on. Let me stop recording.